Her laughter didn't match the room. It was too loud, too warm, too real. I was 10 feet away, standing behind a fake column wrapped in silk garland and battery-powered fairy lights, holding a half-empty glass of flat champagne I had stolen off the back of a waiter's tray. No one had noticed me yet. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Everyone in that ballroom wore the same smug expression, polished, practiced, and plastic. Everyone but her. She leaned into him, a man in a double-breasted suit and those designer monk strap shoes I'd only ever seen on Instagram reels about alpha energy, and the two of them clinked glasses like they'd just closed a $1 million deal, or finished undressing each other with their eyes. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That move, that exact move, that was mine. She used to do that right before she kissed me goodnight. He said something, and she touched his chest. Flat palm. No hesitation. I felt the stem of my champagne glass crack in my fist. Behind me, the band was playing some slow jazz number, but it might as well have been white noise. The chandeliers above were too bright, the air too cold, the scent of expensive perfume too thick, but I couldn't move, couldn't blink. She was still smiling. He put his hand on the small of her back. She let him. And just like that, I realized, this was not a business dinner. This was not a networking event. This was a performance, and I was never cast in the play. I looked down at the name badge pinned to my chest. Dean Hallbrook, guest, M&A division. Printed on glossy plastic, courtesy of a printer in the back of an Office Depot I visited 2 hours earlier. She had told me this gala was employees only. She told me not to wait up. She told me she'd text if it ran late. She told me a lot of things. But right now, she wasn't looking at her phone. She was looking at him like he had rewritten her favorite novel. He leaned in closer. She didn't move away. That's when I knew. Not suspected. Not doubted. Knew. And I hadn't even seen the worst part yet. Not until they danced. Not until the elevator. Not until the third glass of wine, and the missing ring, and the security footage, and the crooked smile the concierge gave me when I asked what floor the executive guests were staying on. But we'll get to that. First, I need to tell you what happened when she finally locked eyes with me across the room and pretended she didn't know who I was. She saw me. I know she did, because her smile faltered for a half second, just enough to register. Her eyes flicked toward me like a reflex, like something caught in her periphery she wished she hadn't noticed. And then, as if rehearsed, she tilted her head slightly, gave a little polite squint, and turned away. Turned away. Not shocked. Not confused. Not even angry. Just indifferent. Like I was some janitor that accidentally wandered into the wrong ballroom. It was surgical. Precise. Cold. My stomach dropped. My legs went numb. A part of me wanted to walk right up, take her by the arm, and say something. Anything. Even if it came out pathetic and trembly. But another part, the part that still hoped this was all some misreading, couldn't move. I needed proof. Not a feeling. Not a gut punch. Something undeniable. So I watched. Like a ghost, drifting from pillar to pillar, always staying a step behind the waitstaff, trying to blend in with men who had real reasons to be there. My hands were sweaty, my throat dry. I think at some point I stopped blinking. She and the guy moved through the room like they owned it. Laughing, toasting, introducing each other to coworkers. One woman even winked at her after she whispered something, and they both giggled. I wish I was making that up. I wish I could pretend this wasn't exactly what it looked like. And then came the dance. Some guy from the company, maybe a VP, maybe just the DJ, announced the floor was open for one special dance with someone who's made your year brighter. I held my breath. I thought maybe she'd step back, pretend to take a call, disappear into the restroom for 15 minutes. But no. She grabbed his hand like it was second nature. No hesitation. No scanning the room to see who was watching. And he looked like he'd just won a bet. The way he pulled her in, the way his hands settled low on her back, and the way she leaned her head toward his shoulder like they'd done this 100 times before. That was my wife. That was my wife. But in that moment, I wasn't her husband. I wasn't anyone. The music played on. I don't remember the song. Just the way the lights caught her dress. The one she told me she had rented for a networking photo op. Turns out it wasn't rented. I saw the tag in the laundry a week later. She bought it outright. I waited until the song ended. Until they finished their champagne. Until they both disappeared through the archway near the back elevators, toward the upper suites. I should have left. Any reasonable man would have left. But I didn't. I followed. And when that elevator dinged, and the concierge at the desk gave them a knowing nod, I knew exactly what floor to press. But I didn't get in with them. I waited. Watched the number light up behind the glass. Floor 18. I waited 3 minutes. Then I walked to the front desk and lied. I told them I left my cufflink in room 1812 during an earlier meeting. And the clerk? He didn't ask for ID. He didn't even blink. He just handed me the spare keycard. That's when I knew this story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about access. And who she was giving it to. I don't know what I expected. Maybe the card wouldn't work. Maybe the concierge would call someone, double-check my story, ask for ID. Maybe fate would step in and stop me from doing something I couldn't undo. But no. The card slid into the reader with a quiet beep, and that little green light blinked like an invitation to hell. And just like that, I was standing in front of room 1812, hearing the soft thump of bass through the carpeted hallway, holding a key to the moment everything would change. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, hand hovering over the handle, listening for any sound that might prepare me for what was on the other side. But there was nothing, just muffled silence and my own pulse thudding in my ears. I remember staring at the peephole, wondering if she'd hear the lock turn, if she'd scream, if she'd cry, if she'd finally look at me like I was real again, or if she'd just stare at me like she did earlier, like I was some pitiful bystander who'd lost the plot of his own life. When I finally turned the knob, it didn't creak or resist. It just opened, like it wanted me to see. The room was dim, lit only by the skyline glow seeping in through floor-to-ceiling windows. The champagne bucket on the table was already sweating. 2 glasses, one still half full, the other completely empty, sat next to a plate of strawberries someone had already picked through. A man's blazer hung over the back of a velvet chair. Her heels were by the edge of the bed, one lying on its side, like she'd kicked it off in a hurry. I didn't hear voices. Not at first. Just a soft rustling, then a laugh, low, breathy, intimate. And then her voice, whispering something I couldn't make out. Not a word. Just the tone. That sing-song, teasing tone I hadn't heard from her in months. Maybe years. The bathroom door was open just a crack, steam curling out slowly like the scene was staging itself. I stepped in further. My heart wasn't just beating. It was trying to climb out of my throat. My knees felt hollow, like if I took one more step I'd collapse. And then I saw it. A phone. Hers. Sitting on the desk. Unlocked. For a second, and I still don't know why I did this instead of confronting her. I reached for it. Maybe I needed confirmation in writing. Something to screenshot and send to my future divorce lawyer. I tapped open her messages. A thread right at the top. Colt, bow and arrow. My hands shook as I opened it. And there it was. A week's worth of messages, none of them cautious. They weren't trying to hide anything. No code words. No pretending it was work. She was sending him things I hadn't seen since our honeymoon. She was saying things I didn't know she was capable of anymore. And then I made a mistake. A loud one. I accidentally knocked over the wine glass with my elbow. It didn't shatter, but it rolled and clinked hard against the floor, spinning once before stopping near the base of the chair. Silence. The laugh from the bathroom stopped. Footsteps. Then her voice, calling out in a sing-song, flirty tone. Did you drop something, babe? And I swear to God, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The bathroom door opened the rest of the way, and that's when she walked out in a silk robe and saw me. She froze. One hand still holding the doorframe, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like she wasn't sure if I was real, like she couldn't decide if she was supposed to scream or lie or laugh it off. Then she said one word that told me exactly how far gone she was. Seriously? Not, oh my God. Not, what are you doing here? Not even, I can explain. Just that. Seriously? As if I was the problem. As if I had inconvenienced her little fantasy. As if I was the one ruining the night. And I wish I could tell you that what happened next was some grand confrontation. Some explosive monologue. But all I did was stare at her and whisper her name. Lacey. It came out broken. Like something I hadn't said in years. And maybe I hadn't. Not like that. Not like someone calling out to someone who's already halfway out the door. She didn't respond. Because that's when he stepped out of the bathroom too. Hair still wet. Shirtless. Smirking like this was a bad sitcom he already knew the ending to. And all I could think in that moment was, they really didn't expect me to come looking. He didn't flinch when he saw me. That's what got me. Not the fact that he was half naked. Not the fact that he clearly knew who I was. But that damn smile. The kind of smile people give when they think you're powerless. When they know they've taken something that used to matter to you and made it theirs. He looked right at me, towel slung casually over one shoulder, like I had walked into the wrong room, and he was the concierge offering to guide me back to reality. My wife, no, Lacey, was still frozen by the doorframe, lips parted, robes cinched tight now like modesty mattered again. Her eyes darted between us, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in them. Not regret, not shame, fear, but not of what she'd done, of what I might do. The air in that room felt like static, heavy, suspended. The three of us just stood there, caught in a moment too awkward for words and too raw for denial. Then he said it. "Hey man," he muttered, wiping condensation from his neck. "Didn't realize we had room service tonight." It was a joke, a dig, a power move disguised as humor. But it hit like a gut punch. Because Lacey laughed. Not loud, not long, but enough. A quick exhale, more reflex than reaction, like her body had forgotten whose side it was supposed to be on. That's when I spoke. And I don't even remember deciding to. The words just spilled out, shaky, half-choked, but louder than I thought I could manage. "So this is it. This is what all the late nights were for? This is why you stopped talking to me like a human being?" Lacey didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Classic. Suddenly she remembered how carpets worked. But Mr. Towel wasn't shy. "You probably shouldn't be here, man," he said, stepping forward just enough to make it clear this was his territory now. "This feels like a bad idea for everybody." I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because this cartoon villain nonsense, was real. This man, whose name I still didn't know, but who had clearly been living rent-free in my wife's life, was trying to manage my emotions like I was some deranged intruder. I turned back to her. "How long, Lacey?" She didn't look up. "How long?" Finally, she whispered. "I don't know, a few months. Maybe longer. Maybe longer." You ever feel your ribs try to cave in from the inside out? That's what it felt like. Like every breath I'd taken since our wedding was suddenly counterfeit. "And the gala?" I asked. "The networking event? That was just your chance to parade around in public like this wasn't happening behind my back?" Now she looked up. "I didn't expect you to be there." And that was the most honest thing she'd said all year. "I didn't expect you to care anymore." Her voice cracked a little on that last part. Like she was trying to turn this around, make me the absent one. And maybe she was right. Maybe I had stopped showing up emotionally. Maybe I was boring. Predictable. Not exciting like the guy in the towel with his stupid perfect abs and smug expression. But I never cheated. I never lied. I never took off my ring and smiled like it didn't mean anything. "You could have just told me you were done," I said, voice shaking. "You didn't have to treat me like a backup plan you were too cowardly to throw away." "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said. "That's the problem," I replied. "You never mean for anything. You just drift into it, and I'm the one who has to live with the wreckage." He cleared his throat behind her. "Look, maybe you two should talk about this somewhere else. This isn't really the place." "No," I cut him off. "This is exactly the place. This is where it happened. This is where you happened." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he stepped back, like he finally understood I wasn't going to swing at him. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break anything. And that scared him more than a punch ever could. I looked at Lacey one more time. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She was just staring at me like a stranger who had walked into the wrong movie theater halfway through. I turned around, walked to the door, and just before I left, I dropped something on the floor. Her wedding ring. Not mine. Hers. I had taken it from her jewelry tray 2 days ago, when I first felt the shift. I'd been carrying it in my pocket ever since, not knowing why. Now I did, because it didn't belong to her anymore. I didn't take the elevator down. I took the stairs. 18 floors of fluorescent light and red exit signs buzzing like flies in my ears. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel each step. Maybe I needed my legs to burn as much as my chest did. Or maybe I just didn't want to share that tiny metal box with anyone who might catch a glimpse of my face and realize what I was. The man who walked in on the truth and still walked back out. When I reached the lobby, I didn't stop at the front desk. I didn't ask for a cab. I walked past them all. The doorman, the valet, the bellhop in white gloves, like I was invisible. And maybe I was. I passed through the sliding glass doors into the cold midnight air like it was a different planet. It had started to drizzle. Not a full rain, just enough to blur the streetlights and make the pavement gleam like wet obsidian. I stood there on the sidewalk for a while, not moving, just breathing in the sharp smell of damp concrete and car exhaust. I think that was the moment I realized something that should have hit me hours ago. There was no way this started recently. No way a man ends up half-naked in a hotel suite, drinking champagne with your wife, if he hasn't been slowly absorbing your life piece by piece for a long time. She had been phasing me out months before I noticed. Maybe longer. Little things, the way she answered her phone in the other room, the way her voice changed when she said, "I'm heading out," the way she started laughing at jokes she never would have found funny a year ago. She wasn't cheating on me. She had replaced me. And I had let her. I walked for 2 hours that night. Through the city, past bars and food trucks and closed boutiques with mannequins frozen in fake joy. At one point I stopped at a 24-hour diner, sat in a booth with cracked red leather, and stared at a cup of coffee I didn't drink. There was a young couple next to me, drunk and giggling and holding hands across the table like nothing outside their orbit could touch them. I wasn't angry. Not really. I was just hollow. Like someone had pressed delete on a part of me, and I hadn't fully realized which part yet. When I finally got home, I didn't slam doors. I didn't break anything. I didn't even cry. I showered. I sat on the edge of the bed we used to share. I stared at the space where her phone charger used to be, now replaced with a designer makeup bag she'd started taking to work dinners. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, and then I started writing a list. Not of things I'd lost, but of things she didn't know I knew. Passwords, shared subscriptions, our joint accounts, the Airbnb she booked last month for her conference, the friend she had who once hinted, when a little too tipsy, that Lacey's been stressed about something lately. Piece by piece, I compiled the quiet inventory of a man preparing not for revenge, but for detachment. I didn't want to hurt her. That would require caring. I just wanted the exit wound to be mine to control. Because here's what people don't talk about enough. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a steady fade out, a dimming of lights, a silence so thick you forget what warmth used to sound like. And when you finally confront it, no one apologizes. They just ask you to stop making a scene. The next morning, she came home, hair still damp, wearing the same earrings she said were too fancy for casual events. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the same page of the newspaper for the third time. She didn't speak at first, just set down her purse and looked at me like we were strangers sharing an awkward lift ride. Then, finally, "So what happens now?" And I smiled. A small, cracked, impossible smile. "Now," I said, "now I let you have him." She blinked, confused. "But you don't get to keep the rest." And I stood up, walked to the coat closet, and pulled out the duffel bag I'd packed while she was gone. She hadn't noticed. Of course she hadn't, because she'd stopped seeing me long before I ever disappeared. She followed me into the hallway barefoot. I heard her behind me, trying not to sound desperate, but her voice had lost that calm edge she always used when she wanted control. Now it cracked slightly at the corners, like she wasn't sure what version of me she was talking to anymore. "Marlon, come on. Don't be dramatic." There it was. The phrase that told me everything I needed to know. She still thought I was the same guy who would flinch when she sighed. The guy who apologized just for taking up space. The guy who mistook emotional crumbs for dinner. But that man was gone. Or maybe he was never really there, just waiting for a moment loud enough to wake him up. I didn't stop walking. Not until I reached the door. Then I turned, calm as smoke. "You had your drama, Lacey. It was upstairs at the Belmont, room 1812. Remember?" She opened her mouth, maybe to lie, maybe to spin, maybe to cry, but I wasn't interested in watching her pick which version of herself to perform. Not anymore. "I'm not going to yell," I said. "You don't get the satisfaction of making this about how I reacted. I've spent years being polite while you slowly erased me. So now, I'm just walking away before I finish disappearing." I stepped out and closed the door behind me. She didn't follow. Not then. I stayed at a cheap business hotel that night. The kind with vending machines in the lobby and a front desk clerk who didn't care that I checked in wearing yesterday's shirt and a dead man stare. I couldn't sleep, so I stared at the ceiling and started moving my plan forward. Because yes, I had a plan now. It started small. I removed myself from our joint accounts, closed down our shared cloud drive, changed the passwords to the things I paid for, Netflix, Spotify, the calendar app she never bothered to set up herself, but always relied on. She'd be halfway into her playlist on the way to work when the music stopped and a message popped up. This account is no longer available. But I wasn't petty. Not yet. Because there was something else. Something she didn't think I knew. The next morning, I called my cousin who works in real estate law. Asked him to walk me through the mortgage clause she never bothered to read when she signed it. Turns out, her name wasn't listed on the house. She thought it was, she assumed it was, but I had refinanced it 2 years ago in my name alone after she missed 2 credit card payments that would have wrecked our rate. She didn't notice because I handled the paperwork. She signed without reading. Typical. So when I texted her later that day, 1 sentence, no punctuation, "You have 2 weeks to leave the house," she didn't answer. She showed up, stormed into the lobby of the hotel, still in her office blazer and lipstick too dark for daytime, and demanded we talk, like adults. I let her speak first. I wanted to hear what her version of reality sounded like now that the mask was slipping. "I didn't plan for things to happen like that," she said, pacing, voice low but sharp. Colt wasn't supposed to be, it wasn't about him. It was about me feeling invisible. I nodded, slowly. "So you fixed that by making me invisible instead. That's not fair." "No," I said, looking her in the eye. "What's not fair is building a life with someone who secretly auditions your replacement while you're still trying to fix the roof and pay the electric bill." She sat down across from me, and for the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked tired. "I thought you'd fall apart," she whispered. "I thought I would too," I replied. "And then I didn't. And that scared you." She didn't deny it. She just sat there, breathing. That's when I told her the final part. The part one knew would sting in places she didn't expect. "I've already talked to HR at your company. I know they have a strict policy on relationships between managers and subordinates, especially during company-sponsored events." Her head snapped up. Panic, real panic, bloomed across her face for the first time. "You wouldn't." I didn't say I would. I said I talked to them. I asked about the policy. That's all. "Marlon, you can't. You wouldn't ruin my job over." "I didn't ruin your job," I said, standing. "You did that the second you made a public show of yourself with a direct report at a corporate gala in a hotel suite paid for by your department's Q4 budget." She didn't speak. Couldn't. And in that silence, I saw the cracks widen. Not because I was being cruel, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one holding the weight of her choices. I wasn't her safety net anymore. And she knew it. 3 days after our last conversation, she was removed from the project leadership board. It didn't make headlines, of course. That's not how these things work. It started quietly. Her name vanished from the company's online directory under senior partnerships. Then from the project launch newsletter I still had access to through a forgotten inbox. Her LinkedIn profile stayed the same, but the flurry of fake smiles and corporate jargon she usually posted each week suddenly stopped. I didn't report her. I didn't have to. All I did was ask a question. A simple, polite question, sent from a burner email to the company's anonymous compliance portal. "Is it true that your Q4 event budget was used for a hotel suite occupied overnight by a senior employee and a direct subordinate? Curious how that aligns with the ethics policy you posted in September." No threats. No names. Just breadcrumbs. People notice breadcrumbs. Especially in offices where perception is everything and silence is rarely neutral. I learned from an old college friend who happened to intern there that an internal inquiry was launched within 48 hours. Colt, that smug towel-wearing guy, was put on administrative pause. Lacey wasn't fired, but she was pulled from public-facing duties. Her name disappeared from every outgoing communication like it had never been there. And still, I hadn't said a word to her. She reached out, of course. A few texts at first, then a voicemail that sounded more tired than angry. She didn't ask to talk. She asked if we could decompress like adults. Decompress. That was her word for it. Like this was a minor misunderstanding. Like her affair, her lies, the sheer disrespect of letting me walk into a room where she pretended I didn't exist, could be unpacked like dirty laundry in a weekend retreat. I didn't answer, but I watched. Because that's what she never realized. I've always been watching. Not stalking. Not obsessing. Just observing the way she crafted stories around herself and expected everyone to play along. But the thing about lies is they're exhausting to maintain, especially when they're made for public consumption. 2 weeks later, her sister messaged me. Out of nowhere. No, hey. No, how are you? Just. I don't know exactly what happened between you two, but Lacey's not doing well. She won't talk to anyone. I stared at that message for a long time. This was the same sister who, 6 months ago, told me in the kitchen at Thanksgiving that I was lucky to have someone as driven as Lacey, while Lacey stood behind her with a glass of Pinot and a smirk. Now she was reaching out like I had abandoned someone on a battlefield. But I hadn't. Lacey had left long before I walked out that door. She just hadn't packed. She called me again that Friday. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. I'll never forget the way her voice sounded, brittle, like a frostbitten branch about to snap. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't even defend herself. She just said one sentence. I miss who we were before I became someone else. I played it twice. And the second time, I heard it. Not regret, not apology, but fear. She wasn't mourning the marriage. She was mourning the version of herself that didn't get caught. A week later, I went to the house. Not to talk, just to grab a few last boxes from the attic before the realtors came by for staging. I expected her to be gone, but she wasn't. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch, barefoot in an old hoodie that used to be mine. She looked small. I didn't speak first. I didn't have to. She looked up at me with those hollow, rimmed eyes and said, "Everyone at work thinks I slept my way into promotions. They think I've been doing it for years." I nodded once. I guess perception matters now. She winced. "You really hate me, don't you?" "No," I said. "That would take effort." I grabbed my box and turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, she said something I didn't expect. "Colt's gone. Transferred to another state. He didn't even say goodbye." I didn't answer, but I thought about that all night. Because for the first time in this whole mess, she finally got left behind. And maybe, just maybe, she realized what that felt like. The house sold fast. Too fast, honestly. The realtor called me one morning, chipper and borderline giddy, saying the market was on fire, and we'd gotten an all-cash offer from a young couple who wanted to raise a family there. I should have felt something. Anger, nostalgia, something bitter and dramatic, but all I felt was tired. Not the kind of tired you get from no sleep. The kind you get when you've been holding your breath for years and finally let it out. Lacey moved out first. I gave her 2 weekends and a polite buffer zone. No contact. No questions. She took her plants, her framed prints of minimalist quotes she never really believed in, her kitchen gadgets she barely used. What she left behind told the truth. A stack of old board games we never opened, a couple's journal she started and I finished alone, and a box labeled Memories, sort later. She didn't. I donated most of it. The day I handed the keys to the realtor, I didn't linger. No dramatic pause on the doorstep. No whispered goodbye to empty walls. I just turned and walked away. The next few weeks were strange. Quiet in a way that felt uncomfortable at first. Like I had to relearn how to hear myself think. I kept reaching for things that weren't there. Her coffee mug on the shelf, her shoes by the door, her voice from the next room. And every time, the silence answered back. But slowly, that silence started to feel different. Less like a void. More like space. Space to breathe. To unlearn. To reintroduce myself to the man I used to be before I stopped speaking up. I started small. A new apartment. New curtains. Bought a bike and rode through places I'd never noticed before, even though they were blocks from where I'd lived for years. I reconnected with an old friend from college. Trey. A guy I hadn't seen since we graduated. We grabbed lunch one Saturday. What started as catching up turned into something routine. Then real. Then necessary. He didn't ask for details. He just listened when I needed to talk and challenged me when I got stuck in loops of self-blame. "You didn't lose yourself, Marlon," he said once, when I told him how stupid I felt for not seeing it sooner. "You gave yourself away. One piece at a time. But you're not empty. You're just rebuilding." That stuck with me. I started reading again. Nothing deep. Thrillers, sci-fi, stuff that didn't require me to pretend I was smarter than I felt. I cooked. Badly at first. Burned rice twice. Set off the smoke alarm once making scrambled eggs. But I kept trying. And slowly, something shifted. I started sleeping better. Smiling without forcing it. I started hearing music again, not just background noise, but actually hearing it. Feeling it. Letting it into rooms I once kept too guarded. One day, weeks after I thought I'd stopped checking, I saw that Lacey had posted something online. A photo of a lake. Just water, clouds, a vague caption. I didn't click it. Didn't open her profile. Just stared at the thumbnail for a second, and then scrolled past it without a second thought. That's when I knew. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need another apology, another explanation, another performance. The real closure was the peace that settled into my bones when I stopped letting someone else's chaos dictate my worth. She had taken enough. My sleep, my trust, my time. But the last thing she'd ever take from me was the silence. Because now, that silence belonged to me. And for the first time in a long, long time, it was beautiful.